York City has somewhere between 6,000 to 8,000 nonprofits. The vast majority of foundations who are located in New York City actually give their money to national efforts. The second thing is that the money that does stay from foundations that stays in New York City goes to hospitals, museums, institutions of higher education, or big research institutions. They don't necessarily go to community-based organizations that are serving different communities in New York. So right away, we know that there's less resources for community-based organizations in New York City. So the Asian Pacific American community is by percentage the fastest growing group in New York. So we make up about 12% of New York City, which means there's about 1 million Asian New Yorkers. However, we get less than 1% of government funding and less than 1% of foundation funding. So that's why it's always important for organizations to leverage all the resources, all the networks, all the relationships that we have to make sure that we can achieve our jobs. It's definitely a challenge.
It's our belief that, and if you look at the statistics, that African Americans are underrepresented in many of the positions that are influencing positions and decision-making positions within the public sector as well as the nonprofit arena. We believe that it's essential that we have greater numbers of African Americans in these leadership and decision-making positions. Right now, many of the decisions that are being made about whether it's resources being provided to communities of color, if it's funding, specific funding that's being made available, or public policies that are being made on behalf of the community, we find that it's often void of having those that are greatest affected at the table and making decisions or informing processes or even being sought after for advice and input in the direction of initiatives that are being developed.
My interest in funding to minority-led nonprofits probably started about 2.5 years ago after attending a few meetings in New York of the Greenlining Institute from California. We were able to evaluate how their efforts were progressing and the impact that, or the response that they were getting from the foundation community. We saw a similar problem in New York. After submission of numerous grants, much time and work and resources, not receiving them, and then asking for a debriefing session to evaluate why we had not received it, it was quite evident in my mind that the problem was more than just technical issues. It really had to do with the foundation not being aware of a lot of the minority-led organizations that were out there.
One great strength of minority-led organizations is that they develop leaders in those communities who then can participate in the civic life of that city or that community. So I think that communities of color have a lot to contribute civically. There are good ideas, good solutions coming out of those communities. There are good ways of actually delivering solutions and implementing them. But it's hard to do that if you don't have people kind of in those communities who are prepared to help. Minority-led organizations often develop those leaders and can actually activate them, can get them to do things. I think one big thing is to help people understand the difference between equitable treatment and the same treatment. Communities of various sorts need different things in order to get to the same level of health and well-being. And they need those different things because their social conditions and their contexts have been so different. And that, I think, is a very basic concept that foundations, organizations, leaders, media makers have to find lots of different ways to get across to people.
Funders need to be more intentional about reaching out to minority-led organizations. In a city like New York, there should not be a reason why there continues to be a funding disparity. And for me, it's really about equity. We have to look at the grant-making side of a foundation. Even if there are people of color who happen to be the communications people or the receptionists, they don't really have a determination where the funding goes. So when we're talking about outreach and relationships, I think there's a lot of opportunities for foundations to really get close relationships with different communities and with different nonprofits. At the same time, I think it's important for nonprofits as much as possible to outreach to foundations. They also need to reach out to foundations and educate them not just about what program they want to pitch and get funding from a foundation, but can they really develop a mutually beneficial relationship with foundations. The way I like to look at it is, as much as nonprofits cannot achieve our mission of serving the community without funding support, the reality is that the government, corporations, and foundations cannot achieve their missions without giving funding to nonprofits.
What we've seen in our grant making, and particularly mine, which is in the area of sustainable agriculture and food systems, the leadership of the movement is not as diverse as the base potentially is. For our theory of change, then it makes sense for us to proactively say, what can we do to elevate or help support more movement level leadership by people of color? One of the things that I like about my experience here at Noyes is that I feel like that we kind of evolve and are responsive to new knowledge in the field. And so that means that as we expose ourselves to people and to ideas, it helps us really clarify what we do that works or what we could do better. Things that I've done have included, we made a grant to have Maya Wiley at the Institute for Social Inclusion do an open, free webinar for our grantees and anybody else who wanted to get on, that we advertised pretty widely, about structural racism in the food system. And it helped to generate conversations, I believe, in places where those conversations may not have happened with the level of information. We also have talked to other foundations about what they've done. One of the things that we've learned is that because board members cycle off and new board members come on, it has to be a continuous process. So you kind of have to be committed to having dialogues anew every year or periodically. And I think it's really important to go through that process.
While the Andrus Family Fund has funded some amazing racial justice projects around the country, we've only just begun to have intentional conversations about what it means to have an all-white board and a nearly all-white staff. Our board has recently made the commitment to bringing in people from outside the board who represent some levels of expertise in communities that we don't represent. And I'm excited to see the possibilities that can come from those conversations. I see CFEP as being a space where foundations come together with nonprofits of color to first figure out an analysis of what the problem is, and then to figure out what we're going to do about it. But if foundations don't end up coming to the table to work on these issues with minority-led nonprofits, then I think CFEP can be a space where nonprofits of color can come together to get to know each other and to figure out ways to act collectively. And whichever way CFEP ends up going, I think it could be exciting.
When I initially came to CFEP, I saw it as a great opportunity to work in coalition with other communities of color. We certainly collectively have many mutual interests and concerns around fairness and equity in philanthropy. This coalition is certainly positioned to build and develop recommendations that would influence and inform future practices and policies and decision making moving forward